Still figuring out life? Good. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm Mary Choi Kelly, PhD, mom, leadership coach, and C-suite veteran with 30 years of helping leaders thrive. On this podcast, Fresh Out and Figuring It Out, we give young adults the mic so they can share their stories and everyone listening can understand who they truly are and what's on their minds. We're also showing the real side of young men, one that defies stereotypes, so that we can rewrite the story together and help every young adult, both men and women, grow into confident, compassionate leaders who know their worth and lead with heart. Follow the show. We're figuring it out together, one story at a time. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Fresh Out and Figuring It Out. Today, we're going to have such a fun conversation with someone who has lived essentially all over the world. And he's going to talk to us about what it means to be a third culture kid, how he's navigating work and relationships, and so much more. So let's just jump in. I'm going to introduce my guest here shortly. And before I do, we always start every episode with a would you rather question, since life is all about choices. So here's your question. Are you ready?
Ready. Thank you very much for having me, Mary.
Of course. Would you rather have unlimited confidence or unlimited second chances?
Wow. I think that's a no-brainer for me. Unlimited confidence. Because I simply don't want to have any regrets, and just moving on past that decision and not having to look back and change my mind afterwards is probably something that I try to live by. So unlimited confidence.
Confidence, I think, is such an important thing, especially for young adults and quite honestly, all of us. It's something that I still struggle with. And let me just introduce my guest. His name is Stan Prehu. And I want to say, Stan, I've known you almost your entire life. I mean, I know your mom and dad have known you longer. I might be close to one of the few that have
You're a close
known
third.
you. I'm close, right? Okay. So the first time I met you was when you were a little baby in Town-les-Vosges, France, which many people may never, ever visit. I was fortunate to be living in and working in France. And that was in my mid-20s. I met your mom, such a wonderful, wonderful person. And here we are 30 years later, from the point that I met you as a small child to now where you're a young adult thriving and a guest on my podcast. And then the next time I saw you, you were a young boy and your mom was attending a business meeting in Santa Monica. And I don't know if you remember this, but it was past your bedtime. We were in a very, very nice restaurant in Santa Monica. And we had created a little bed for you out of 2 chairs in the restaurant and laid you down to sleep so that we could finish our dinner. Do you remember that?
I do not remember that, other than the stories that I've been told by Mum. I think that was a go-to move as a corporate woman back in the 90s. She had to bring me along everywhere and used to rock me under the desk whilst she was having some corporate meetings. So
that's right.
Yeah, I've heard those stories quite a bit, but I don't recall them.
Okay, well, you were adorable. And then I think the next time I saw you was in New Jersey. You lived in Summit, New Jersey when your mom was working. And it was your first time to the US as an expat. And then again, I saw you in Houston, and now you're in New York. And you spent a few weeks with us when we lived in Newport Beach, kind of house sitting while we were on a trip. So that was really fun. And so I feel like I've had
best summer of my life.
Okay, good. Yeah. You can't really mess up a summer in Newport Beach when you're 16 years old, I guess. So
No.
Good memories. All right. Tell the audience a little bit about you and how you would describe yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind when I try to describe myself to a group of newcomers is being a third culture kid, right? So being a third culture kid means growing up in a place that is not the place of your passport or of your family's direct origins. So I grew up in a Franco-Croat household, and we moved. I think we're shying up on 30 times
Oh
throughout
my
our
gosh,
entire life.
30? Are you serious? 30? 30.
30 different moves, and I haven't hit the 30 myself, so it's certainly been quite a lot. We did all of Europe as a family growing up. My sister was born in Belgium, and right before we moved to Summit, New Jersey, was really a European upbringing, with very European values, and we stayed very close to family. We saw a lot of our grandparents, and I think when I was 6 years old was really when we embraced becoming expats for the first time. So I think for me, coming to America for the first time as a 6-year-old boy was essentially coming to Disneyland. You can't dream of any place better. I remember going into my first day of school, and it was mid-year because we arrived in the winter time, and they had a whole presentation for the school to welcome me with banners and with flares, and I felt like a football star. But
You were a little
I was
celebrity there in your elementary
I was
school.
a little celebrity, and I was surprisingly really welcomed by all the folks that today still keep in contact with me. One of my dearest friends, Sean, is a friend that I made on that first day. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is being a third culture kid is all about adaptability, and making sure that you can gel in various different environments. I didn't necessarily have a choice as to where we were going to live, but I did have a choice as to how that was going to resonate with me, and that's what I tried to do as I grew up. Sometimes more difficultly than others. Certainly, some moves as a teenager were much more difficult, leaving friends and family behind. But you learn to grow with the challenges, and they certainly brought me a lot, and I still tap into all those skills today.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about that because your journey in terms of moving and adapting continues, right? So you came to the US, you started in New Jersey at 6 years old, and then you moved to Houston. Then you made some other moves to pursue education, right? You went to university in Canada. So talk about moving and adapting and learning new cultures again and again.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you just get a bit of a travel bug when you grow up with this kind of experience. So for me, it was never really an option to stay close to mum and dad, and to try to go to school and university in my backyard. So at 18, I went to Montreal, and studied in Concordia University, which was really quite a highlight as a European kid, right? I had gone back to Europe after our short stint in America, and the first thing I wanted to do was be the varsity athlete that I had seen on all these movies growing up, and I think that stayed with me from my American experience, was the idea of going to university in North America. You're raised with the idea that university is kind of the educational end goal. So I was extremely thirsty to get that experience. I really wanted to really engage in an atmosphere that was North American, but also had similar values. Quebec, obviously being francophone, was really important to me. And then I went to do my master's in Spain, and that was my kind of biggest outside of my comfort zone experience, because it was probably the first time that I moved to a country without speaking the language. So I highly recommend all of the listeners to try to do that at one point in their 20s, because it's a very humbling experience at first. It also tests a lot of the relationships that you can engage in And just in general, I think it puts you in a very difficult atmosphere, but you learn to grow with all of the different trials and tribulations that it throws at you. So Spain was a real test of character, and one that I didn't think I was going to enjoy as much as I did. I enjoyed it so much that I came back to Madrid a couple of years after graduating university when I was soul searching, and I'm sure we'll get to that later on. But it's incredible how some of these decisions that you make, especially in your mid-20s, when everything seems to be up in the air, do end up being a catalyst for the person that you become.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, traveling when you're young or on the younger side of things, I do think is such a gift. Like I said, when I lived in France and traveled for about a year and a half, and lived outside the US, I mean, I spoke broken French. I got to practice it and realized that very different from what you learn in a classroom when you're trying to speak with fluent, native tongue speakers, as well as try to navigate it in a business environment, which added another complexity to it. But I loved it. I really loved it because it made you really immerse yourself not only into the language, but the culture. Like you really got a better understanding of the differences in how people view not only work and life and really connect in a different way. And it just broadened your entire life view, your worldview,
Yeah.
better said, right? So that global view to me, I think really shaped who I became in terms of a person as well as a leader in an organization because of the experience I had in my 20s. And, I know that many students in college, it's at least in the US, right? They do a semester abroad or what have you. And I think that's great. And I
Absolutely.
think it's probably a little different from like what you said, really living in the country and the culture, versus being there on a little bit of a boondoggle. It's probably fair to say.
Yes. A tourist
when you,
visa.
yeah, when you're on a broad program. So tell me more about your journey because if you look at it on paper, wow, people are going to be like, oh my gosh, he's part French, Croatian. He's lived in the States. He's lived in Canada, in Madrid. I mean, you're checking a lot of boxes for a lot of people. And before you do that, just tell everybody how old you are, because you have a lot of experience, and you're also still pretty young.
Indeed. Yes, I'm 29, and I'm completing my 2.0 version of myself this year. So I think it's going to be it's definitely left me with a lot of thinkings for the decisions that I took, the risk that I took as well. One of the biggest risks was, as you said, just putting myself out there in conditions and countries and places that I didn't think I would live. We spoke about Spain, but I have to give a lot of credit to COVID for putting me outside of my shell, because I moved to Poland in the midst of the pandemic, and that was also an experience for me that was very much shaping of the person that I am today. So currently work for Amazon. I work in the AI space, which is a fascinating space to be in at the moment. Emerging technologies have never been more rampant. I truly think that there's some form of understanding of what the industry has to offer that everyone should tap into. And I certainly didn't project myself as I was leaving my academic career behind, that my professional career would take me into working for one of the bigger tech firms in the world, and in such a department. So you never really plan for these things to happen. I certainly haven't had what most people would refer to as like an organic CV that just streams from one experience to another. most of it was shaped by my travels. A lot of it was also shaped by my connections and my network and the people that just took me under their wing, wanted to show me a lot more depth to what I was originally setting myself up for. It's really important, I think, in your 20s, especially when you're thinking about the next steps, that you don't project yourself too far. Some people want to make 5-year plans and commit to those. Well, I would say you're actually making 5 years of inability to change your mind, which you should never back yourself into. It's super important to keep a broad horizon. You never know the connections that you're going to make in the various places you're going to meet people. So having those original limiting thoughts was something that I wanted to actively work on, especially coming out of my master's program. I was adamant on just seizing opportunities, committing to what I thought was right for me at the time was very important, but being able to pivot and shift those expectations and those goals quite quickly is something that I've always tried to implement.
Yeah, so let's go into that a little more. You went to Canada for university. What did you study there?
Studied political science and human rights. So I
Okay.
was supposed to be on the cover of UN General Assembly magazine, if that even is a thing. But that was the idea when I went into university.
Okay, so you went and got that degree, and then you pursued a master's degree.
Yeah, so I did my master's degree at Instituto de Empresa in Madrid in international relations. So that was bringing me closer to the private sector, although I was still adamant that public sector work is was my true calling, and I wanted to work for an international organization, potentially the UN. The idea was really to be a public servant, and and the shift doesn't happen without some tests of what you actually want to end up in. One of my biggest tests was the fact that I didn't want to commit to a UN experience without having some kind of professional background in the private sector. Um, I think you mentioned it earlier, but my mother, just like yourself, is HR. So she gave me a lot of words of wisdom about how to, set up your career so that you could go into the best conditions possible. And yeah, I started off in consulting, which sounded like the best and greatest thing right after my master's, and I quickly moved past consulting because it takes a particular type of person to love that job. Nothing against consultants, by the way. I have a lot of friends who are consultants, but it just wasn't my calling. And 3 or 4 other jobs had to be worked through. I worked for petrochemical companies for a little bit, so I really vacillated between what I thought was going to be a UN civil servant experience and one of really, what do I want to do? What is the job title that I'm searching for? And universities don't always prepare you for that. I think that's also an important call out. Is you can't expect to get out of your studies your dream job unless you're working in law or medicine. There's a lot of the humanities, as they're so often called, right, that don't necessarily link or map one to one with a job at the end of it.
Yeah, so I mean, if I summarize, it sounds like you went to school and went kind of for your passion. You really thought you want to work in the public sector, you want to do good in the world. I mean, all really wonderful things. And then dedicate all this time, right? Like you went 4 years in university, 2 years in a master's. Now you've invested time, energy, resources to doing this. And you're like, what am I going to go do? What do I really actually do?
Yeah,
How do I make money? Like that realization often hits, right? Now I have to go make a living. And what is that going to be? So, talk about that, and go into a little bit about how you really felt, because that is a lot of your life that you devoted going down a certain
yeah,
path, and it maybe wasn't what you thought it was going to be. So, um,
absolutely. I think That's exactly the first feeling that you have is I've done something wrong. I must have done something wrong because all of the friends that are getting jobs straight out of university seem like they're getting something right. So it's an immediate comparison with the people that were very close to you, were probably doing things in the background that you weren't seeing, but it's an immediate comparison. The second one is a true sense of disappointment in myself, in the fact that you really aspire to the next steps, and I don't think that I really gave myself a chance by not being a very good planner. I've always kind of lived life by the day. I still kind of do, right? I think it's also a strength of mine that I try to be as much in the moment as possible. But I didn't know what it meant to apply for a job. I didn't know what it meant to interview in specific, environments. I was 24 and thinking about rugby and girls. So there was a lot going on in my head that was peripheral to finding a job. And for me, the biggest calling was I want to be in London. I want to be in a big city. I want to experience something new. I think it was just a calling for fresh air and a new place. But I didn't really plan things out the way that I probably should have. Looking back at it, do I regret it? Absolutely not. I think I learned a tremendous amount during those years. And then you also create your own luck. So I realized how important it was to rely on the network that you have built around yourselves. Mary, I know that I've told you this in person, but you've been instrumental to helping me as well in finding my path and the conversations that we've had. And likewise for a lot of people, it's just sometimes the smaller chats and just trying to understand where you're going, how you're going about making those decisions. It's not always about the end goal and the end job. It's actually the journey that leads you there. And it sounds really cliche to be saying it that way, but it's really true.
It is true. And, I want to go back to what you said is like, you don't have regrets. And I'm glad that you said that because, life is a journey. And the only reason why you are where you are today is because of the things that happened before you got to where you are today. And all the things that are happening today that will take you to where you will be tomorrow. And, I tell my kids a lot, and I'm not sure that they fully understand what I mean is, this idea of failing fast. One of the episodes is about my son Connor's journey, and he had one of the most devastating experiences in his life to this date, and he's only 20. So, but that was his first real moment where he felt like a failure. And it was extremely hard as a parent. I mean, crushing to watch. And watching that and knowing that you can't do anything to really help them. However, the other side of me was, experiencing that now is a real blessing in many ways. Because if your first failure is at the age of 30 or 40, your ability to recover, your ability to actually build some skills and to know how to address that. And the stakes are so much higher at that point in your
Mhm.
life versus in your
Absolutely.
20s. And so I do think it's really, really important because I think there are many, many people right now who have spent 4 years in college, potentially a master's program. It is a really tough job market. And to your other point, life is a lot about luck, the timing of things. And we can't plan that. There's definitely a lot of things that we can do as individuals. And there are some macro things that are going on, in every kind of time period that will maybe help you and that will get in your way. So there's a lot of people right now that I know are kind of asking the same questions that you've asked yourself. So I think it would be really great for you to go into that a little more. You talked about you just made the decision to move to London. You get a job as a consultant. Again, this all sounds like amazing. Like, Stan, what are you complaining about, right? You got what you wanted.
Yeah.
So what happened?
First thing is careful what you wish for. Right. I think a lot of idealism is put around the future, especially at a young age. You're a student. What happened is, I started as an energy consultant, and I was working outside of my direct periphery. So the dream of living in London actually ended up being in gloomy Manchester. Nothing against Mancunians, but that is northern England for anyone who doesn't know, and the weather is pretty bad. I didn't have a social life. I was working, a ridiculous amount of hours, and what I really ended up with was a job that looked good, and I did it for the gratification, but I didn't do it for myself. I didn't do it because it was a calling of mine. Just getting a pat on the back, I think, was what I was looking for. Just saying, right, you've accomplished, and over again. And I know that your first episode really touches upon that, but it's how do you get that gratification from the people you love, that you are doing the right things. And I think until I moved away from the UK and I started making my own decisions, I was in eternal kind of state of please validate everyone else, please validate the decisions that I'm making for myself.
Because
It's a
maybe they
character
weren't really
trait as
decisions for
well.
yourself, right? I think what you're saying is you were
Exactly.
looking for that gratification because they really weren't decisions that you were making for yourself. So until you actually
Yeah.
kind of did some soul searching and realized, okay, this is what I really want to do, and took that path, then
Yeah.
you weren't searching for that gratification outside of you. You were getting it inside of you, which
Yeah.
is so important. And you're many, many years ahead of me. That I didn't come to that realization till I was in my 40s. And so you're doing pretty good, Stan. So I
You
think
know,
when you were,
I
go
do
ahead.
want to add one thing. I just really want to add one thing because I think part of what we have seen thus far is that forcing yourself to stop for a second and see what is before you. I would have not been able to make that step and that realization of I'm not in the path of what's right for me if it hadn't been for being unemployed after COVID hit. So when I'm talking about my experiences in the UK, I think it needs to be that COVID hit. So I was still on probation at my job, having just started, and the HR lady was so kind in saying, "Here you go. We won't be keeping any of you on." And it was me and about 70 other people because we were the easiest to fire. So you also have to take that time and say, right, maybe I wasn't happy, but also I've been forced into this situation that I can't control except for my reaction. And I took that time. I really did. I took about 7, 8 months to, rekindle with my closest friends that I could still see, but also just ask myself the right questions about where my next move would take me and what I wanted to do.
So what you're saying is you had just moved to London, you got this job, you're a consultant, you're working crazy hours, you're realizing that you actually hate it and that you really
Yeah.
didn't want to do it. Not these are my words, but that's kind of what I heard in a nutshell. And then COVID hit. So then the world shuts down. Everyone's, trying to figure out what they do. Companies are laying people off or firing people because there is no business. And you get hit with that, along with many, many other people. And I think what you're saying is COVID was maybe a blessing that you didn't expect.
Hugely, absolutely. Blessing is exactly the term. Not only because of the restart button that was forced upon me, and at that point in my career, I would have just kept, my attitude towards resistance is just like I don't care how many times I have to batter the wall down, I'll make it fall. And I didn't give myself that time to just stop and take a breath and realize maybe what decisions I'm in charge of for myself, for my happiness, for my health. A lot of these things, they kind of accumulate and they build up. So, being unhappy and having more mental stress and feeling down leads to physical, unhappiness as well. And you start looking at your worst, and therefore your dating life isn't the same. And it's kind of a snowball effect. And so I found myself in that effect, and I really don't say it. I know a lot of people were affected by COVID tremendously, but I don't say it lightly. COVID for me was a great restart.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that felt that way for different reasons. And, I want to reinforce what you said. Early in our life, we go to high school. That's what people do. We go to college. That's what you're supposed to do. And then you might go to grad school or you get a job and you keep going. Like you don't even really think through it. You're just going down this path. And there is a bit of this escalation of commitment, right? I just got this degree. I spent 4 years working on this degree. I spent all this money. My parents spent all this money. I have to go get a job. So then you get a job and you're like, well, I have to keep this job because I should be grateful. And I wanted to be a consultant, and maybe it's me. Like I got to figure out how to like this because everyone wants to be a consultant. So I'm going to keep going at it, even though, this isn't what I want to do. And I've just got to figure it out and keep going down this path. And it is hard to stop that train. Mm-hmm. So for you, it was kind of, you were forced to stop. And that was exactly what you needed. So I think that's a really great point. I think COVID did, for many, many people, help them reassess and reprioritize what's important in their life, which essentially is what you did as well. So then what happened? You got some clarity. You really kind of did some soul searching.
Yeah, I got some great clarity by moving to Eastern Europe. I think yeah, absolutely. So I lived in a small town called Katowice that's about 45 minutes away from Krakow. And this experience was not only the catalyst to really starting a career that I decided for myself and built for myself, but also humbled me in the experiences and the human experiences that I made, right? Katowice, that small place in Poland, it's one of the last remaining places where you still have active coal mines. So a lot of the friends that I made over there and I played rugby with were coal miners. There's nothing like a coal miner to speak some really hard truths that you just bow and say, absolutely. So I learned a tremendous amount about myself.
I talk about people like that. These are people that are doing real work.
Real work, indeed. And that put their blood, sweat, and tears into what they do. That are incredibly giving with the very little that they sometimes have to give. And just extremely welcoming experience for me, because I went there alone. I went there with, in what we just described as being a need for a restart. But I also went there in search for who I am, who is Stan. And that was a really amazing experience. On a human level, I met some incredible people, but I forced myself also completely outside of my comfort zone. I was engaged in humanitarian work when the war in Ukraine broke out. I tried to do as much as possible for the community that I was starting to grow very fond of. And I knew that this was probably going to be a short-lived time. So I really went in there giving everything I had. And this is probably something I want to just pause on for a second, is don't ever take for granted the longevity of your time in certain places and with certain people, because for many various reasons, you find people going off and doing various different things. Your closest friends one day will won't even be a saved number in your phone 10 years later. So really make the most of saying what you want to tell them in the moment. I think that was super important for me, was also just uh, coming about it with as much of a positive attitude as I could. It's sometimes hard. Don't get me wrong. I was living in pretty precarious conditions from the London dreams that I left my master's program with. But I really had to remind myself that this was all worth it, that this was all a journey again. And it was also a great time to reconnect with the people that I held very dear to me, even though they were far. It was almost my obligation to pick up the phone and call my closest friends and call my parents more often, and make sure that my immediate circle was still very much there.
Well, and I think maybe you have a very different perspective, right? Life, when you have difficult experiences, when you went to London and you thought it was going to be the end all be all, and it wasn't, it was maybe one of the low points in your life. Then when you go to a place like Poland, which you never would have had on your list of places to live, you have a different perspective. You become a little more grateful.
Yeah. Humility is key. Humility is really important, especially when you're approaching things that are outside of your comfort zone. Don't look at things with a veil of judgment. Really, just take it in for what it has to give you, and smile at the opportunities that you're given. Honestly, like, never turn down a dish, never turn down a conversation. Those are kind of two of the key rules that I try to live by. And you end up eating really wild things, and you end up talking to even wilder people.
I love that. It's those experiences and opportunities that enhance your life just in general. So every time we go into a new situation, it opens up so many other doors and opportunities that we never expected. We didn't have that on our 5-year plan, as you stated.
Absolutely.
That's when kind of the beauty of life emerges. So what did you learn from that? I guess that whole period, that whole transition, what would you say were some of the key takeaways for you?
So the key takeaways are first that expression of really humbling yourself in front of the various different happenings that will occur. I want to say that I am very welcoming, and I don't bear too much judgment, but sometimes it just creeps up on you that you have suddenly this like attitude with regards to what you're owed, and because you've done all the right things, you're owed that job, you're owed that salary. So really putting yourself in someone else's shoes, seeing how the other half lives, and being very humble in front of certain realities, because there are people that struggle with a smile. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do so. So that was a massive learning for me. The second one is back yourself. Don't let anyone tell you that this is crazy or impossible. If you have it in your guts to go out there and to be the go-getter that you presume, or you sometimes boldly speak. I think especially in younger male circles, I certainly grew up in a very macho friend group with all of my rugby mates, and it's almost easy to shoot down that ideal or that thought that is a little bit outside the box. Go chase it. What is there to lose? To your point, I think you don't have any dependencies at 25. You can actually throw yourself at the crazy random idea, and those were probably the best decisions that I've made today, were the ones that I just wholeheartedly went with.
I love it. So, what about any advice? If somebody is feeling stuck, maybe they're in a job they hate today, and they feel like they can't do anything about it because they got a degree, they got bills to pay, or what have you, what would you say to them? What kind of advice would you give?
Absolutely. So I've actually, I'll take this from advice that I've given my sister, but it's if you're struggling for 1, 2, or 3 days, you should not like reconsider and throw the kitchen sink at it and say, I'm not doing this anymore because that's life. And there will be days with and there'll be days without, and you can't have the perfect day every day. But if it's been 5, 6, 7 months that you're miserable and that you really, really hate what you're doing, it's your obligation to find a better source to your happiness. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to the people that care about you. Do not stay in the feeling of being stuck. And even though all eyes may be on the expectation that you're doing great, or that everyone's complimenting you for having the right decision path, if you're not the one that's happy with that decision path, you owe it to yourself to fix it. And one piece of advice that I do want to say as well is talk about it. Talk about it with peers. Talk about it with your mates, but also find mentors. Find people that have been around the sun a few more times than you, because there's a lot of advice that is to be given from people that are maybe 5, 10 years older. It doesn't matter. It's just about getting different opinions, and don't see it as a weakness to ask for help. It really is a big stigma, I think, in young men to just like figure it out on their own and trap themselves in this idea that it's all going to get better if I just keep grinding at it. Well, it's not. It really is not. You have to change something up, and asking for help and being able to like voice it out is the most important.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one. And your tie back to what you said about young men is young men are less likely to share or connect with people when they're in distress, or if they're unhappy or they're lonely. And to your point, one of the greatest things about doing that is first finding out that you're not alone. Your story, as much as it's very unique, a lot of the trends that you share and some of the issues that you experienced are universal. People have gotten into jobs that they're unhappy with. They've had to move into situations they're uncomfortable with. They've questioned their decisions. These are things that people go through, and the more people you talk to, everybody has a different perspective or an experience. And those experiences is not to say that you should do what someone else did. It's to take what other people have experienced, pull out of it what you can take and what resonates with you and how you might be able to apply it to your life. And the other side effect of that is to realize, wait a second, this isn't me. Right? This isn't like there's something wrong with me or I did something to create this. This is just a part of life. And I think that perspective is so important, and something that you can really best gain from talking to a lot of different people. But it takes a certain level of,
Absolutely.
vulnerability to be able to do that, and know who you can lean on and who you can trust and who you can reach out to. So what about any advice that you would give for people that are moving into new cities or countries or what have you? I mean, oftentimes you get out of college, you might get a job and it's in some city you've never lived in. So it's a great adventure, and it can also be very scary and lonely. So what kind of advice do you have from the different places you've lived and how you tackled that?
Yeah, I think that's one I can probably say that I've tested and trialed. This is a really important one, because I think too many people, when they go for these adventures, they seek a certain outcome that is natural to come to them. So it's, I've put myself out there, I've gone to a country, and therefore I'm going to experience it, or I'm going to take it all in. The biggest thing I say is put yourself in the shoes of a local. Walk the streets as if you were a local, but also keep showing up to the places that you think are going to be appealing to you. For me, it was my sport. I've played rugby since I was 10 years old. It's something that I know I could carry over to any culture, any country, and stem at least a conversation, but also share a passion with people that I didn't necessarily speak a common language with. But it can be anything. It really can be anything. It's the most important is that it's not driven behind by technology. I think we need to get off our screens. We need to put ourselves in places where just natural conversations are happening, and just really fall for interests for things that have just sparked your imagination. If it's the arts, it's the arts. If it's a sport, it's the sport. But don't put yourself in these positions where your limiting thoughts of, oh, back home, this is who I am. You carry that over to the countries or the places that you visit, because no one knows who you are. And you get a clean slate at representing yourself and saying that about yourself.
Right? I mean, you really can
Yeah,
reinvent
it's
yourself.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
That's another thing that we know about young men is they don't naturally create emotional connections. Although when
yeah,
you have a common goal or a common bond, like a sport or being a part of a club or a group, um, those types of situations, they have a really, really strong bond, and they
formless.
know that they support one another, and they're really, emotionally connected, and that building a strong emotional connection is one of the most important things for a healthy, long life.
Yeah,
So that human connection, to your point, is so, so important for all of us. And especially for young men, because it doesn't happen as naturally. So let's talk about what's going on with you now. So you got through all that, you sorted yourself out, you've experienced life, and decided that you're making decisions for you that's going to make you happy, and really honed in on how you're going to apply that in your career. And you've moved back to New York. You're in
yeah,
a relationship. So
indeed.
tell us about what's going on with you now.
Version 3.0. So I'm entering a new decade, with high hopes and full intentions. So the the reality is that I am in probably the best state mentally that I've been in my 20s. I'm extremely excited about what is to come. I think there was a big roller coaster that we've just talked about, that ultimately is, a lead up to what this next decade is going to bring, which I'm thoroughly excited about. I found myself a wonderful partner that I share my life with, and I can't underestimate how much that has also helped, right, to just shape a lot of the and probably dwindle a little bit of the voices in the head of, you're not doing this right, you're not, making the right decisions. It's nice to just have a sounding board, and someone that you can speak to, and that can come in the form of a relationship. It can come in the form of a lot of friendships as well, and it can also come in the form of therapy, right? I think everyone just needs someone that they can speak to, and I'm super excited about this next chapter. New York is a wonderful place to be in at the moment. There's just an endless stream of things to do, and places to see, and cultures that are constantly interacting. So I couldn't think of a better city to kind of express myself and close out my 20s in. So it's very exciting.
So, it's interesting because more young people, what I read, they're delaying kind of the start of a serious relationship and things like marriage, fewer marriages, or at least later in life. So, tell me about your journey in relationships, because I loved what you said early on, that you were really more focused on rugby and chasing girls. And so now here you
Yes.
are in your late 20s, and you're in a committed relationship.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of expectations that I certainly set for myself. I almost had, a to-do list of things that I wanted to take off before I could envision myself with someone. Is it the right approach? Is it the wrong approach? I still probably don't know. Um, there's a lot that you are expected, or at least that I put myself through as an expectation. So having a stable job was one of them. Being stable just in terms of where I wanted to live was another. And I realized that all of that went out the window as soon as I found my person. So, don't putting those limiting thoughts in your head is probably a very big takeaway that I have for that. Uh, there's also a lot to be said just about how you feel with your own body and with your own self. I was not the most confident kid growing up. I suffered a lot from bullying. There was a lot of things that probably distorted the perception of myself, and so trying to overcome that, and you go through some heartbreaks, and you probably realize, well, those demons from childhood tend to just spiral back in. Self-doubt was always a big thing of mine, and you don't necessarily always have the recipe to how you answer those. So you just have to live through those experiences. Back to your question, I think the key was, for me, don't force the person that you're going to commit to. It's probably going to happen most naturally. Just make sure that you surround yourself with good friends who tell you, mate, I think you're going off the wrong path here. If you are, but there's a lot of opinions to be had. The most important is still very much yours.
I think your comment about being ready internally, right? How you saw yourself. And again, life is full of cliches, and there's a reason why they are cliches and that we continue to talk about them, because there's a lot of truth to them. You have to love yourself first for someone else to love you. And how you feel about yourself, people can sense it, and you really send that vibe out into the universe. I remember the period in my life where I was like, okay, I think I am ready as a person to really, get involved with somebody else. Like, I have a better understanding of who I am and what's really important to me. And
Yeah.
that does take time. When you graduate high school and go into college, like, I always say, like, oh my gosh, who I thought I was then to who I thought I was in my 30s to who I became in my 40s. And now, my God, who I know I am in my 50s. I love my 50s. I wish I had this in my 20s, right? But it only happened because I've had 55 years of experience to fall back on. It's this whole concept of knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, knowing what's important to you, knowing what kind of life you want to live, knowing what values you have, etc. So when you get that clear, it's reflected out into the universe. And I feel very lucky to have met your partner, and she is just lovely. So what's next for you?
So what's next, I think, is definitely putting on my big boy pants. I have to still make a few major decisions in my couple years. I'm thinking of a longer term, finding the right partner, starting a family, making sure that I've got a great job, or at least job stability, I guess. And all of those things, I don't want to let them consume me. I still want to keep that fresh and happy-go-lucky attitude that's brought me all this way. There's so much that I'm looking forward to in terms of also being able to give back, giving back to the community that I've been so thankful to be raised by, my parents, my family, my close friends. I certainly feel like I've got a brotherly bond with some of my best friends, and those people are also going through their own hoops of life. So what's next is also just being a good person, trying to help people up when they need a hand. I certainly don't have like a short-term memory for the people who were there for me, so I'm trying to be adamant on keeping that as on the forefront of my mind.
And paying it forward. I think that's just, I think that is a really important thing in life. None of us got to where we are alone. And what can we do to pay it forward and help others? So I have a set of questions that I'm asking all my guests. So I'll start with one, which is, what's one stereotype that you've heard about young adults your age? And How would you like to dispel that?
Yes, I've got one that really rubs me the wrong way, and it's that young people are lazy. So I think, we have technical advances that are allowing us to be a little bit more hands-offish from the traditional jobs that our grandparents may have had. But I certainly don't think that this generation is lazy. I think I've seen a lot of extremely hardworking people who are at a match with the people that I grew up with. I also think that we're being sold short as like a generation. I really don't like the term of Gen X and Gen Zs and categorizing people through the decade that they were born in. There's so much more to an individual than that gen that they are.
I think that these labels can be dangerous. I mean, I understand why we do it just in general because it helps us to simplify information. And at the end of the day, they are generalizations and stereotypes that oftentimes people hold on to too strongly. And,
Yeah.
Regardless of what generation you are, I find that there's more similarities and differences. People fundamentally want to be treated with respect. People want to have strong relationships. People want to have input into things that affect them. People want to continue to learn and grow. I mean, these are consistent regardless of what year you were born in, whether it's 1970
Absolutely.
or 2020, right? Whatever it is. All right. So, okay, what are the three most important things that you look for when you consider a job or a company or a career?
The three most important things. So first of all, I want to start by saying I think that has probably changed between when I first started my career and what I'm looking for now. I think when I started my career, all I was really looking for was the top line. So what is the job title? What is the compensation? And how many vacation days will I get? Now the primary things that I look for is what is the growth that I can get from this job? So one of the things that I mentioned previously is before working in emerging technologies and AI, I didn't really see a clear path to what the future held in the industry that I was working for, and that really was something that I tried to ask myself. So that's the first thing: is where is this career decision taking me? I think compensation as a whole should not be looked at as a salary value. I think you should be looking at like what the progression in that field is. Are you limiting yourself in terms of growth? Is this job going to be the same job for the next 25 years? Do you have outside opportunities? And that's the compensation that you should be looking for, not necessarily the dollar value. However, I still very much hold true to the fact that I'm looking as well for a job that I can marry with my personal life. I very much am a European in that sense. I don't live to work. I work to live. And there's so much to be said about how happy that makes me, and the opportunities that my job enables is the main reason why I get up every morning.
Great. All right. Some questions about young men. What do you think it means to be a man?
What it means to be a man. That's a charged question, isn't it? Because I think each to their own in terms of definitions. I certainly grew up in probably a much more masculine environment from the men that I have in my family, and the sport that I play. So I do hold true to certain values that are probably not resonated by everyone. For me, being a man is still very much being strong and charismatic, and a protector of people's values, of people's opinions. I think it's something that I've tried to bring along to the conversation. I ended up coaching rugby for a little bit, and these boys would ask me, how do I get like you? And I'm like, you don't want to be like me. You want to be the best you that you can be. And I think that's what being a man is actually not letting yourself be like someone else, and really chasing the best you that you can be every day.
Great. What do you think it means to be masculine?
Well, being masculine is definitely having a few beers with the boys in the bar. No, I'm joking. I'm only joking. The the ideal of masculinity, I think, is really just being able to have to be comfortable with who you are, to be able to express yourself, and not feel like you have a expectation that is set from other people and from other men, but really to be able to express yourself to be the man that you want to be. And that can be in just about every form. I realize that I'm saying man a lot in this answer, but it really is. You're supposed to follow your gut, your instinct, express yourself in the way that you feel is right and just.
Great. How would you describe yourself?
I'm a pretty happy man. There's a Latin word called being an Epicurean, and it's a man who loves life. And I certainly do love life. I certainly try to seize a lot of the opportunities that are thrown my way. I try to smile as much as possible, and it's probably the best way I could describe myself as an Epicurean.
Great. What does supporting young men look like, in your opinion?
Supporting young men, and this one is very important for me. Supporting young men is doing all the things that you would have wanted someone to do for you. Because there's no other playbook than what you can look back on and say, what was I missing? What could I have what could I have really used in a point in time in my life? Don't get a script. Don't try to get it perfect. Just get it done. Do it. Ask the questions. Ask how you're doing. Um, Take a time to chat, but also care about the answer. Don't be superficial about the engagements that you have with your friends, especially when it comes to younger men. I really want to speak less and hear them more, because it's amazing how much you can learn from someone if you just ask a couple questions.
It's wonderful. And I think that's true with anybody that you speak with. I think speak less and listen more. It's a great way to engage with others. Last question. What would you like to see change about the story about men?
I would I would really love for young men and just boys in general to be able to get out of their shells, and one thing I would really want to see change is those mental health numbers. I think we're losing far too many men to mental health every year. I certainly have lost friends to mental health problems. That's something I really want to see change. It's something that I hold very dear to me, because unfortunately we don't have today the avenues where people feel comfortable to be themselves. I don't think that we're promoting it within our own circles, and you don't need to have an impact on hundreds or thousands of people, and you don't need a Instagram following of millions of people to impact and save and really change one person or two people's lives. So that's an adamant change that I would like to see. Just let's take care of one another in a way that's human and that's decent.
That is just beautifully said, Stan. And I think you're doing your part in how you're looking at supporting young men. And I know your view on mentoring and how important it is to you and to really help uplift young men, which is exactly why this podcast is so important to me, to get the message out that we need to be here to support and uplift young men as much as we are uplifting women. So I just want to thank you so much for being with me today. It really is a full circle moment for us to kind of go back to when we first met, when you were a little child, to now just a blossoming young adult who is carving a path that is completely yours. You have so much to be proud of. And I'm just so lucky to say that you are within my circle, and appreciate your time and for sharing your story with us.
Much too kind. Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and now it's your turn. Take what you heard today and put it into action. Share this episode with a friend who's figuring life out too. And let's build a generation of leaders who lead with heart. Follow the show, leave a review, and connect with me on social so we can keep figuring it out together. See you next time.